I remember the quietest Saturday morning, about 2 months after everything was finalized. I was out in the garage, just organizing my tools, when there was a knock at the front door. It was Olivia. She looked smaller. Tired in a way makeup couldn't hide anymore. She asked if she could come in, but I just stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. And as she stood there, pleading, telling me she understood now, that she wanted to try again, I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something profound. I had finally found myself again. The peace that comes from not being taken for granted, the quiet strength of knowing your worth. It's funny, because it took my entire world unraveling to get there. You see, for 15 years, Daniel, had been a rock. A foundation. And somewhere along the line, my kindness, my steady provision, it got mistaken for weakness. Olivia thought she could build another life on top of the one I'd provided. She genuinely believed it. And then, one Wednesday night, she came right out and told me she'd found her soulmate. We'd been married since our mid-20s, together for 15 years, and there she was, sitting across our kitchen table in our home in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was glowing, like she'd just discovered fire, talking about how he was genuine, how money meant nothing to him. Her voice got that breathless excitement it always did when she was obsessed with a new yoga studio or meditation app. I just smiled. I nodded. And I went upstairs like I was heading to bed. But I didn't go to bed. I sat on the edge of our mattress, phone in hand. At 11:42 p.m., I texted my lawyer, David. 3 very specific instructions: close her credit lines immediately. Stop all payments for her mother's memory care facility. Confirm the house as separate property, purchased before marriage. David, a guy I'd worked with for years, the one who set up my will and helped me buy this house before I even knew Olivia, responded in 5 minutes with one word: done. Then he asked if I wanted to meet Friday morning. I said yes. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly slept. Let me back up a little further, because this wasn't some snap decision. This was the final domino falling after years of careful stacking. I'm Daniel, 41, and I work as a lineman for the power company. That means I climb poles, brave storms, work overnight shifts when transformers blow. I come home covered in grime that doesn't wash off easy. It's dangerous work, the kind where you're always one mistake from being a statistic. But it pays well. Really well. Well enough that for the past 12 years, Olivia hasn't worked a single day. Well enough that I bought our 3-bedroom house in a decent Raleigh neighborhood, yard, 2-car garage, all paid off, before we were even married. Well enough that I'd been covering every single bill, every grocery run, every random hobby she'd pick up and drop within 3 months. And yes, well enough that I'd been paying $4,500 every month for her mother, Mrs. Miller, at Willow Creek Memory Care. A private facility with actual nurses and therapy, not some bare minimum county place. Olivia, she's 39. And she's beautiful, in that effortless way that makes people assume she's got her life together. Hot yoga 3 times a week, a closet full of Lululemon, fluent in Instagram captions about self-care and finding her authentic self. For 12 years, her job had been finding herself. Photography, pottery, life coaching without certification, then something with crystals I stopped asking about. At first, I didn't mind. I thought we were building a partnership. I handled the financial pressure, she handled everything else. But everything else kept shrinking until it was just her own schedule and her own interests. The signs started small, the way they always do. New friends I'd never met. A sudden, passionate interest in art galleries, which was funny because she'd always said museums were boring. She started dressing differently, not for me, but for when she went out, which became 2 or 3 nights a week. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always face down, always buzzing with messages that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. I'm not an idiot, and I'm not the jealous type, so I didn't immediately jump to conclusions. I just stopped asking questions. And started paying attention. Here's what I learned the hard way: when someone stops caring, if you notice their change in behavior, they've already checked out emotionally. Then came that night. I'd worked a double shift, 16 hours straight in freezing rain, because a storm knocked out power to half the county. I came home expecting, I don't know, maybe some sympathy? Or at least a hot meal. Instead, Olivia was sitting in the living room, buzzing with this nervous energy, like she'd been waiting for me. She asked if we could talk. And I knew, right then, what was coming. I sat down, still in my work boots, and she told me about Julian. A creative consultant, whatever that means. They met at some gallery opening her new friend dragged her to. It just happened, she said, like she'd tripped and fallen into emotional intimacy. We connected on this deep level, spiritually, you know? I didn't know, but I nodded. She kept going, talking about how Julian understood her, how he was genuine and authentic. All those words that basically meant he wasn't me. Money means nothing to him, she repeated, like that was supposed to impress me. He lives in this tiny apartment, makes art, and he's just so real. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything or demand she leave. None of that movie drama. I just asked if she was planning to leave me for him. She got this look, half guilty, half annoyed, like I was missing the point. I don't know, she said. I just needed to be honest with you about what I'm feeling. That's when it hit me. She wanted permission. She wanted my blessing to explore this thing with Julian, while keeping all the comfort and security I provided. She wanted to eat her cake and have it too. And she genuinely seemed to think I'd just sit there and take it. Have you ever had someone confess something awful to you, and then expect you to thank them for their honesty? So, I told her I needed to think. I kissed her on the forehead, like nothing had changed, and went upstairs. That's when I texted David. Olivia thought I was processing. Maybe even coming around to her enlightened perspective on love and soulmates. She smiled at me the next morning over coffee, gave me this grateful look like I was being so mature and understanding. She had no idea that by the time she woke up, her safety net had already started to disappear. The joint credit cards where she was an authorized user? Frozen. The call to Willow Creek? Already made, informing them I was no longer responsible for Mrs. Miller's care, and they should contact the family for next week's payment. The house she'd been living in rent-free for over a decade? Legally confirmed as mine, and mine alone, purchased 2 years before we even married. I went to work that morning like any other day. Climbed poles, fixed lines, came home exhausted. Olivia was out, probably with Julian, probably feeling like she'd finally broken free from whatever cage she'd imagined our marriage to be. I made myself dinner. Watched some TV, and went to bed early. Friday was going to be interesting, and I wanted to be rested for it. She thought she'd found her soulmate, someone genuine who didn't care about money. That was about to be tested in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Because when you spend 12 years not working, not building anything of your own, money suddenly matters a whole lot. Friday started normal for me and ended in complete chaos for Olivia, though I didn't get the full details until much later. I went to work at 6 a.m., spent 8 hours replacing insulators on a transmission line, and came home around 4 to find 19 missed calls and a dozen texts, all from my wife. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I already knew what had happened. And honestly, I wanted to take a shower first. When I finally sat down with a beer and pressed play, the progression was almost entertaining. The first message was confused, asking why her credit card got declined at some restaurant downtown. The second was annoyed, demanding to know about some mistake with the bank. By message 9, she was crying. By message 14, she was screaming. That restaurant incident was perfect timing, completely unplanned by me, but beautiful in its simplicity. Olivia had taken Julian to lunch at some trendy spot with small plates and big prices, probably trying to show him she had resources. The card declined in front of him, the server, other tables who definitely noticed. She tried another card from the same account. Same result. Julian apparently offered to pay, which he did, but you could hear in her voice how humiliating it was. This genuine artist who didn't care about money had to rescue her from a $70 lunch bill. And something about that moment seemed to shift things between them, though she didn't say it directly. The real panic came about 2 hours later. Willow Creek Memory Care doesn't mess around with payment. Their billing department is ruthlessly efficient. They called Olivia directly since I'd given them her number as the emergency contact when I informed them I was no longer financially responsible. The woman on the phone was polite but firm, explaining next week's payment of $4,500 needed to be arranged immediately. If the family couldn't commit, they'd have to begin transitioning Mrs. Miller to a county facility. Olivia completely lost it, according to what she screamed at me later. She told them there was a mistake, that I always paid, that this was impossible. They told her to contact the family member who'd been handling payments. That's when she called me 8 times in a row. I let it go to voicemail every single time. I wasn't being cruel. I was being strategic. And there's a difference. Every hour she spent panicking was an hour she spent realizing exactly what her life actually cost, and who had been paying for it. When I finally called her back around 6 that evening, she told me she was at Julian's apartment, which I found darkly funny. She didn't even say hello before launching into it, demanding to know what I'd done, why her cards didn't work, what was happening with Willow Creek. I kept my voice level, almost bored. I just told her I was no longer covering her expenses, and that her mother was her responsibility, not mine. There was this long silence. Then she started crying, real ugly crying, not the pretty kind she did when she wanted sympathy. She came home around 9 that night. Julian didn't come with her. She walked in looking destroyed, mascara everywhere, and immediately launched into a speech about how I was punishing her for being honest, how I was vindictive and controlling. I let her talk, standing in the kitchen with my arms crossed. And when she finally stopped to breathe, I told her the truth. I'm filing for divorce, I said. You wanted honesty, so here it is. I'm done. She actually laughed at first, the sharp, disbelieving sound. Then she got mean. She told me I'd regret this, that her lawyer would destroy me, that I owed her for 12 years of marriage. She listed everything she thought she deserved: the house, half my pension, alimony, continued payment for her mother's care. She said I couldn't just cut her off, that she'd given me the best years of her life. I didn't argue. Arguing with her was pointless. Instead, I went upstairs and called David again, told him she was threatening legal action, and asked him to expedite the divorce filing. He said he'd have papers ready by Monday and that I should document everything, keep records, and absolutely not engage emotionally, no matter what she said. The real bomb dropped about a week later when I met with David. He brought in a forensic accountant named Sarah. She was this sharp woman in her 50s who looked like she could smell financial deception from 3 states away. David had hired her to go through our accounts with a fine-tooth comb. What Sarah found made my stomach drop, even though I thought I was prepared for anything. There was a credit card I didn't know about, opened in Olivia's name about 18 months ago. Sarah explained Olivia had likely listed our household income, which is technically legal for a spouse, even if ethically questionable when done secretly. The balance was $11,000. Every single charge was what you'd expect: hotels, restaurants, jewelry, lingerie stores. The timeline, though, didn't match with Julian. These charges went back a year and a half, which meant Julian wasn't the beginning. He wasn't even the middle. He was just the latest name in a pattern I'd been too busy working to notice. Sarah walked me through it with printouts and highlighted dates, showing charges at hotels 20 minutes from our house, dinner reservations for 2 at places I'd never been, purchases from stores I'd never heard Olivia mention. She explained the spending pattern suggested multiple relationships over an extended period, with charges changing every few months in terms of price points and locations, but maintaining a consistent pattern of deception. David just watched me, probably waiting for me to explode or break down. But I felt weirdly calm. It wasn't a betrayal anymore. It was evidence. And evidence was something I could use. Would you be able to stay calm looking at proof that your entire marriage was a lie? Olivia's lawyer, some aggressive guy named Thomas, reached out the following week. He sent a formal demand letter outlining everything Olivia wanted. It was extensive: the house sold with proceeds split 50-50, half my pension, alimony of $3,000 a month for 6 years, continued coverage of her mother's medical expenses. The letter cited her contributions as a homemaker, the standard of living she'd become accustomed to, and my substantially higher income. It was professionally written and completely disconnected from reality. David responded with our own letter, attaching Sarah's preliminary findings and suggesting mediation before this got messier than it needed to be. My best friend since high school, Ethan, came over one night with pizza and beer. I told him everything. He'd never liked Olivia much, always said she treated me like an ATM with a heartbeat, but he'd kept quiet because that's what good friends do. He asked if Julian was still in the picture. I told him no, that Olivia hadn't heard from him in days. Turns out, genuine artists who don't care about money also don't care about $4,500 nursing home bills, I said. Ethan almost choked on his beer, laughing. I just shrugged and said she'd thought a lot of things that didn't match reality. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving Sarah time to complete her full forensic analysis. She found more evidence, including another credit card from 2 years ago with $8,000 in charges that Olivia had paid off by skimming from our joint account, a little bit at a time, so I wouldn't notice. She found hotel stays, dinner reservations, even some text messages Olivia had been careless enough to send from our family plan phone. Some of the men she could identify through restaurant reservations and social media cross-referencing, though I told her I didn't want names. It didn't matter who they were. It only mattered that I could prove the pattern. Olivia had been living 2 lives. One was funded entirely by me, while she lied to my face about finding herself and seeking spiritual growth and whatever other nonsense she'd fed me over the years. Julian wasn't the beginning. And honestly, he probably wasn't even special. He was just the first one she'd been confident enough to tell me about. The first time she'd gotten so comfortable in her deception that she thought she could make me accept it. She'd wanted permission to keep both lives, the security I provided, and the excitement they provided. And when I didn't give it to her, everything started crumbling. Her soulmate disappeared. Real responsibility appeared. And she was living on her sister's couch, scrambling for answers. The mediation was coming, and I had evidence she didn't know existed. She thought she held the cards, but she was about to find out she'd been playing a game she couldn't win. The mediation happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and institutional furniture polish. Olivia showed up looking like she'd actually tried. Hair done, makeup perfect, wearing this professional outfit I'd never seen before, probably from her sister's closet. She had Thomas with her, the aggressive lawyer who'd sent that delusional demand letter. He had this smug energy, like he thought this was going to be easy money. David sat next to me, with Sarah on his other side. Between the 3 of us, we had 2 bankers' boxes full of documentation. I watched Olivia's eyes flick to those boxes and saw the first crack in her confidence. Just a tiny moment of uncertainty before she covered it with that fake smile she used when she was nervous. Thomas started strong, laying out Olivia's position like he was performing opening arguments in a trial. He talked about her contributions as a homemaker, the career opportunities she'd supposedly sacrificed to support my dangerous job, the standard of living I'd provided that she deserved to maintain. He mentioned her mother's medical needs, the emotional trauma of this sudden abandonment, my substantially higher income. It was a good performance, very rehearsed. If I didn't know what was in those boxes, I might have even felt guilty. Olivia sat there nodding, playing the victim perfectly, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though no actual tears appeared. Then David opened the first box. He started with the timeline, walking through our marriage year by year, emphasizing that Olivia hadn't worked in 12 years despite being perfectly healthy and capable. He showed documentation of every hobby she'd started and abandoned, every failed business idea I'd funded, every expense I'd covered while she pursued her endless journey of self-discovery. Thomas tried to interrupt a few times, but the mediator shut him down. I watched Olivia's face get tighter and tighter as David methodically destroyed the narrative she constructed about being a supportive partner. Sarah took over next, and that's when things got really uncomfortable. She laid out the first secret credit card, the $11,000 balance. I watched all the color drain from Olivia's face. Sarah went through the charges one by one, hotels and restaurants and jewelry, highlighting dates and amounts with a clinical precision that made it impossible to deny or explain away. Thomas tried to object, calling it a violation of privacy, but Sarah calmly explained that the card was tied to marital assets through the household income claim and was absolutely relevant to the proceedings. Then she brought out evidence of the second credit card, the one with $8,000 in charges from 2 years ago that Olivia had paid off using money systematically skimmed from our joint account. Olivia started crying for real then, not the pretty kind, but the desperate kind. And she looked at me like I was supposed to save her from the consequences of her own choices. I just stared back with nothing. No anger, no sympathy, just this flat emptiness where all my feelings for her used to be. Thomas called for a break. They huddled in the corner while he presumably explained how badly this was going. David leaned over and asked if I wanted to offer anything, maybe compromise to speed this up. She gets what the law says she gets, and nothing more, I said quietly. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. When we reconvened 15 minutes later, Thomas's whole energy had changed. The smugness was gone, replaced by the tired professionalism of a lawyer who knows he's lost but has to see it through anyway. He made a much smaller counteroffer, $50,000 as a lump sum settlement. No alimony, no claim to the house or pension. David didn't even pretend to consider it. He laid out our offer, $3,000 for moving expenses, immediate signing of divorce papers with no contest, complete release of all claims to my assets and income. Olivia actually gasped out loud. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but Sarah wasn't finished yet. She pulled out the final piece of evidence, a comprehensive timeline she'd constructed showing at least 4 different relationships over the past 2 years, cross-referenced with credit card charges, social media activity, and even some text messages Olivia had carelessly sent from our family plan phone. Sarah explained that this pattern of ongoing infidelity, combined with the financial deception and the fact that the house was separate property purchased before marriage, meant that in our state, Olivia had virtually no legal claim to anything beyond what I was offering. Thomas looked at the documents, looked at his client, and I actually saw him deflate in his chair. He asked for another break. And this time, when they huddled, I could see him basically telling her it was over and she needed to take the deal. The final agreement matched our offer exactly. Olivia got $3,000 for moving expenses. Period. No alimony, no property claims, nothing else. She had to sign a complete release and agree to handle all her own debts, including those secret credit cards. The mediator drew up the paperwork right there, and I watched Olivia sign it with shaking hands, tears dripping onto the pages and smudging the ink slightly. Thomas packed up quickly, probably eager to get away from this disaster of a case. And Olivia just sat there for a minute after they left, staring at nothing. I stood up to go, and she finally looked at me. "Daniel," she said, her voice cracking. I stopped but didn't turn around. She asked if we could talk privately, just the two of us. I told her there was nothing left to say. David touched my arm, and we walked out together, leaving her sitting in that conference room with all her choices and consequences laid out in front of her. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later, quick and clean, because there was nothing left to fight about. I heard through Ethan, who heard from someone else, that Olivia had found work at Walmart and was still living at her sister's place. Mrs. Miller had been moved to a county facility, one of those places where the staff is overworked and underpaid, and the residents sit in front of TVs all day. Julian had apparently vanished completely, along with whatever other men she'd been seeing, because it turns out spiritual connections don't survive reality very well. I changed the locks on the house, not because I thought she'd try anything, but because it felt symbolic, like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. And that brings me back to that Saturday morning. When Olivia showed up on my doorstep, looking small, trying to rewrite history. She said she'd made terrible mistakes, that she understood what she'd had, what she'd thrown away. She even said, "I'm different now," her voice taking on that pleading quality I'd never heard from her before. I just looked at her for a long moment. And then I told her the truth she needed to hear. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said, calmly. "You're sorry it didn't work out the way you wanted." She tried to argue, started to explain, but I just held up my hand and told her it was time to leave. She stood there for another minute, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she finally walked back to her beat-up car and drove away. I went back inside. The house was quiet. Really quiet. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. I made dinner for myself, watched a game on TV, went to bed early because I had an early shift the next morning. My life looked almost exactly the same from the outside. Same job, same house, same basic routine. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight anymore. I wasn't funding anyone else's fantasies or paying for anyone else's mistakes, or pretending not to notice the signs. I absolutely noticed. She'd chased what she thought was a deeper connection, a soulmate, something more real than what we had, and she'd lost everything in the process. I'd lost a wife, but I'd finally found something I'd forgotten I was missing for 15 years, myself. And the peace that comes with not being taken for granted. Do you think I handled this the right way?